That doesn't sound promising.
Yeah, so that we're going to have to cut that out.
Okay.
That remote connection, and she misspelled your name, so that's a bad start. So, so we will edit that out. So I'm on a bad connection clearly. So our fancy intro system did not work, but we've got a great sport, a flexible traveler who can deal with what we call irregular operations. So welcome, Dia, the Deal Mommy. And you're someone that I've had the great pleasure to meet in person multiple times. You've even been at my mother-in-law's in Shanghai, so that's as much as extended family as as I can count. And you are
it's very exciting.
You are based in the DC area.
I am.
And maybe that's a question, because how do you define? Is it Fairfax County? Is what you would say you live in, or
the
DC area and where people live and the tourism opportunities beyond the core of downtown Washington, DC that we think about?
Oh, that's right, because you were before FTU, you were doing like a very localized sort of trip to some of the...
I went to the National Museum of the Marine Corps. I saw the site, but I assume I don't know when it'll open now, the new National Museum of the U.S. Army. Fredericksburg, I was down some of the presidential sites, and even in the neighborhoods, thinking of Lincoln's Cottage, these places that are just beyond the core that maybe not everybody's aware of.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually an alumni of George Mason University, to sort of give you an idea. So that's like, we're very much into all of that. And if you're back in the area, there's a wonderful Masonic temple. It is actually like the one where a lot of the founding fathers went in Alexandria. And that's a really cool place to stop as well.
Fantastic. And for those people that haven't been to DC for a number of years, what's new, what's different? I'm thinking of like the National Museum of African American History. We'll assume travel gets back to something approaching normality, but even after, what you need to get tickets in advance, all of that stuff.
Assuming that things reopen. I mean, that's always the challenge. The thing I like about the DC area that people don't realize is how, if you get 10 miles out of the city, it's pretty well rural in a lot of places. So it's actually... there's a lot of opportunities for outdoor type activities. Harper's Ferry, which is about an hour northwest of DC, is on the C&O Canal. It's got some wonderful hiking trails and stuff like that. And I think that people are going to be a lot more interested in that kind of stuff than kind of going into the urban areas, I think, for the foreseeable future. I mean, hopefully the Smithsonian's are going to open back up, but even when they do, I think it's going to be at such a significantly diminished capacity that it's going to be tricky to figure out, exactly when and how you're going to get there.
Yeah, so let's talk about, so we've got Harper's Ferry, we've got a number of Civil War sites, Revolutionary War sites.
Exactly.
A number of them, if you don't know the history, you just go and you see a grass field, or you see you see a plinth or a statue. Some, if you go up into Pennsylvania, Gettysburg is so evocative because there's so many memorials. What are some of these that I think reward the casual visitor that isn't so familiar with the history, or with kids along, perhaps?
That's a good question. I think it's a pretty drive, and it also has vineyards and other little places where you can stop. Is if you go out Highway 29 and you pick it up really downtown DC, and you just take it sort of southwest, and you go past Manassas, which is a huge battlefield. You go continue down, and you end up in Charlottesville, which is Jefferson's house. But along there's just like all these little towns and just little kind of places to stop and have lunch. And there's probably 4 or 5 vineyards on the way there. And Virginia, actually, for red wines is decent. I definitely don't recommend the whites. I think the whites are nowhere near as good as some of the West Coast ones, but the Virginia reds are actually somewhat drinkable. So that's actually a fun little afternoon as well.
Fantastic. And where are you located? So you're doing a little bit of a travel now.
I am.
A vacation, but tell us about what you're thinking of, and also if you can share in terms of traveling. You're a mommy blogger, so to speak. So what are the ages and what is the family unit that you're traveling with?
Well, I'm my husband. My kids are 16 and 13. I'm currently sitting in Virginia Beach. I'm actually here by myself. For the first 24 hours, I've been alone since January, I think. I had my teenager son down here with two of his friends for most of the week. And I picked up just sort of like a last minute timeshare. It was $300. I'm like, well, for that price, I might as well go ahead and go. And it's been nice. It's been very mellow. I've really not been doing much. I haven't left. I've used my car at all since we got here. Sort of walking on the boardwalk. Instacart's open. Uber Eats is open, and it's been great. Just sort of having a very pretty new thing to look at and a new place to walk. It's been wonderful. I actually spent the entire month of May in Myrtle Beach, and it was the same thing. I took my daughter with us since she didn't have school. And it was just the same thing, just for us to have a change of scenery. And also, it doesn't matter how big your house is. Eventually, you start running into each other, and just give the kids a break from each other. To give my husband and I a break from each other, because any marriage, sometimes space is your best friend. So that was also very nice, and that's really kind of how I've been managing it: is doing things that were within driving distance, doing things that have a lot of outside components, so that I don't feel like we have to take people anywhere. In Myrtle Beach, I move the car maybe once a week, and that's worked for us. When we were in Myrtle in May, it was a lot better than it is now. South Carolina, I think, has taken things in a negative direction. But here in Virginia, people are very conscious of what's going on. You have to wear masks to go into, and even like to go to the hotel lobby, we have to wear a mask. And I feel like people here are taking it reasonably seriously.
Myrtle Beach is a destination that is probably known to golfers and known regionally, but maybe not so well known internationally. So what is Myrtle Beach? What are the attractions, say, for an overseas visitor?
That's a loaded question. Myrtle Beach, well, it's kind of like saying, what is the attractions of some of the British seaside towns? If you asked a Brit, they'd probably be like, well, the attraction is I went there every summer when I was, in the 70s. And the mid-Atlantic beaches, I think just in general, kind of slide under the radar, because people, if they think beaches, they either think Florida or they think like, Cape Cod or the Hamptons or something like that. And there's some really nice little stretches along the Atlantic between, here in Virginia and then through North Carolina down into Myrtle and down to Hilton Head. And it's just, each community has sort of its own culture. Like here in Virginia Beach, it's very military. I was warning Stefan that you might at some point hear fighter jets crossing by our hotel. It's quite loud. In Myrtle, it's a lot more family, and it's a lot more what I would consider to be like carnival-ish. I mean, like there's a wheel, there's a big shopping mall kind of complex thing called Broadway. Hilton Head is very quiet. So each community kind of has its own. The Outer Banks are known for Kitty Hawk, obviously, with the Wright brothers, but they're also known just for kind of isolation. People just sort of go there to unplug. So every community sort of has its own little vibe.
I was going to continue right down the coast to Disney, one of your specialties, but you said a word that triggers emotions for a lot of people, and I think you're doing it in a very different way than the public concept. So timeshare. And I think you said last minute, I think it was discounted. So we would need a multi-part session of how you do this. We can give the 5 or 10 minute version. It's fascinating. I heard you talk about timeshares and how somebody that, like me, I pride myself. Oh, I'm not one of those timeshare people, but
right.
I don't understand the way that
I mean, basically, it's a hotel. It's a hotel rental. But what happens? Just sort of long story short, I'm talking about renting timeshare units. I'm not talking about buying timeshare. But basically, what happens is when people own timeshare, they put it into a bank, and the company that owns the bank then puts the properties that are put in the bank, they rent them back out. The problem is that timeshare is a hotel inventory, and hotel inventory is not money. it goes bad at some point. It's like day old bread. Bread eventually you can't let it sit forever. It's going to get moldy and it's going to, have to be thrown away. And it's the same thing with hotel inventory.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're overstocked in a certain region of the country, you're not going to sell it. Or if it's last minute, you're not going to sell it. It's the company's incentive just to get rid of it at any price, because $300 is better than $0, which is what they'd get if it weren't rented. My favorite site is called Sky Auction. And it's basically like the Filene's basement of the timeshare universe. But in timeshare rental, you don't have to do a tour. You don't have to sign up for anything. You're renting a hotel room. And to be honest with you, a lot of times if I'm renting a Marriott, they'll even give me stay credit. $300 a week. That's happened 3 times in a row. My last 3 Marriott timeshare stays, I've gotten stay credit retroactively in my 1,000 check-in points for being a Titanium. So yeah, it's much more, just think of it as renting a hotel room. The downsides are that inventory is constantly changing. You have to go with what's usually last minute is when you're going to find the best stuff. It's non-refundable. So there's a bit of risk involved if you don't think you're going to take it. But if you're doing it last minute, then, you just show up. And just because you're renting a week, you don't have to stay a week. Sometimes even the math works out. If you're paying, $300, it might make sense to stay 3 days. You might still come out ahead over renting a hotel room like this. In Virginia Beach, the DoubleTree next door is going for something like 60,000 points tonight.
Oh, wow. And let's walk through the example of, you said Marriott. So people think of Marriott as a hotel. There's a timeshare. So if I want to hopefully get lucky with my stay credits, what's the process I go through to book a Marriott networked timeshare?
Well, if you want to do it the bargain basement way, I've done this twice in the last year through Sky Auction. I found a room. One was in Paris.
It's called Sky Auction, skyauction.com.
Sky Auction is the site I usually use. Yeah, skyauction.com. And they're sort of like the site. They're actually partnered with RCI. RCI is the biggest timeshare bank, and RCI is actually owned by Wyndham. So there's sort of like a connection with the whole industry there. Wyndham is pretty much the largest operator of timeshares, and RCI is the largest bank.
So how many? Maybe we do the whole constellation then. So we've got RCI.
Okay. RCI is the timeshare bank. They're owned by Wyndham.
Okay.
Wyndham also operates a number of timeshare properties, in addition to owning RCI, which is the bank upon which every company's members deposit. So like when you buy into a timeshare, you buy the timeshare itself, you buy the property, but then you also buy a membership to a bank, basically a club. And so these people are depositing. So Marriott owners are depositing into RCI because they want to go somewhere else. So they're depositing, say they own in Orlando. They're depositing their Orlando week because they want to go to Hawaii. So that's sort of how the bank works. And that doesn't have to be like an immediate one-for-one trade because it's a bank. The whole point is that there's, 10,000 weeks open for all these people to trade among themselves. But then as the inventory gets lower and lower and the date gets closer and closer and closer and the inventory isn't selling, then it just goes like it's distressed inventory. And then
there's RCI, but you don't go directly to them to find the deals?
No, you go to Sky Auction. There's a couple of other sites that are affinity based, but they're very loosely defined as to how they define affinity. One is called Armed Forces Vacation Club, and it's ostensibly for Armed Forces active members, veterans, and their families, but they define families rather loosely. So there's not really like a specific, like you have to send an ID. And then there's another one called Heroes Vacation Club, which also is for first responders, but they don't really say what a first responder is. And then it's also, and their families. So, it's a very loose definition that no one seems to really sort of force or define. And those tend to go for about $349 to $399 a week, but it's all the same bank. They're all coming from the same place. And the place itself is RCI. And the one that's open to the general public is the Sky Auction.
Okay, so we go there and we just hunt around. It's a straightforward booking process?
Pretty much. The people that are obsessively looking for award space, this is my version. This is how I spend an entertaining Friday night, while having Netflix on in the background. I'm browsing Sky Auction.
And how far out does it list, and how far out are the actual deals?
If you're willing to go somewhere off season, you can find stuff months out. I booked the Canary Islands once. I stayed in July. I think I booked it in January. But there are certain places that always have timeshare. The Canaries, Orlando, Vegas, Tahoe. There's like 8 or 9 destinations that are just overly built with timeshare. So those you can find pretty much any time of the year. Other times, the last 3 I've done have all been on less than a week's notice. And I was actually just browsing the site today, and I saw the Sheraton Vistana on there for 2 weeks from now for like $399 a week for a 2-bedroom.
Where is that? I'm not familiar with that property.
It's in Orlando.
Ah, okay. All right. So Sky Auction, and that's the main option you use. It's straightforward. It's not like 100 different sites to check. And
No. It's just you can go down the rabbit hole. That's my only warning to you is that, definitely, have a drink by your side and plan to spend a while because it's very addictive.
the information then is consistent and accurate for what you're getting. Is this by everybody listing their own thing? Is it?
No. It's not it's an auction site, but it's not like eBay. The auctioneer is RCI.
Mm-hmm. So they know the floor plans and that are all accurate. And
Right. What I do recommend for people that aren't used to renting timeshare, you're renting an apartment. You're not getting, even if it's a branded, you're not getting daily housekeeping generally. Mm-hmm. I always check TripAdvisor because a lot of times there'll be places you've never heard of because they're individually owned units. Mm-hmm. So I always check TripAdvisor to make sure that it's whatever it is, I can live with it. If it's a branded one, you can be a little bit more assured in terms of the quality. This one, for instance, is independent. It's fine. It's probably, it reminds me of the Country Inn and Suites. But for $300 a week, it's all good.
Oh, fantastic. So that's some of the points things and travel hack things. You start to wonder at the end, is it worth all the time and effort? But this looks fairly straightforward. You buy the price is good. You buy it a bit like a fair deal.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's like.
It's just addictive how often you're.
Very, very much so. And in this current climate, it's a very good way to find, because a lot of people aren't traveling far ahead and you're looking for things in driving distance. So it's a very easy way to find things that might be, close to you.
And I'm just thinking, is the site very transparent in the pricing, or is this like Airbnb where you click to the last screen and suddenly there's hundreds of dollars of extra charges?
It's transparent if you know what you're doing. And what I mean by that is $1 is never $1. At the bottom of every single auction, it lists the service fees, but they're listed always in the same place.
Okay.
And they're almost always, if it's a $1 auction, they're almost always $2.99 and a $20 service fee. If it's like a higher auction, sometimes they'll do things like they'll sell the week for $3.99, but then they're not charging the service fee. And then it's just, the $2.99, and they're just charging like $20. Sometimes there's a date surcharge. There's usually some sort of deposit, credit card deposit, like you would leave at a hotel. But Sky Auction is crystal clear in the terms as long as you read the terms.
Okay. And in terms of check-in times, is that restricted, or do they have access around the clock? Or
usually, it's like a hotel, 3:00 or later, but they're staffed. It's a hotel, it's staffed.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking those you get in, the flight's delayed or whatever, you get in at 11.
Yeah, these are apartment units. So unless you're like in Europe or Asia, where it's somewhere where there's sort of, I've been to a couple. We actually rented a few years ago a timeshare that was in a castle in Austria. It was actually
you pulled up the drawbridge and you had to cross the lake.
It was close to that, actually. It's no longer Dennis timeshare, unfortunately, but it was near Salzburg, and it was the castle where Ludwig stayed when he was planning Neuschwanstein. And the owner at the time, the last owner was like in the Victorian era, had a real Pan kind of fetish. So there were all these like statues and frescoes of Pan everywhere. But that one was like you had to check it between like 4 and 6 on Saturday, and we almost missed our flight, and it was a drama to get there. But in the States, they're pretty much always 24-hour staffed.
So you've it sounds like Europe, Asia, you've tried these in a lot of places and had good experience.
Yeah, pretty much. I've probably rented, 20 years. Probably rented over 100 timeshares. I've had one that was horrendous that we had to get a refund on in all of that. I've had a couple that were But the vast majority have been either fine or I'd say maybe 25% are great.
And so if you're renting that many times through this method, it sounds like you're not using Airbnb, VRBO, these tools all that often, or?
No, I do that too. But they're apples and oranges. These are timeshares are going to be in specific kind of destinations. You know what I mean? Like the kind of place where you would expect to find high-rise type hotels or apartments are the places where you're going to find timeshare or some sort of like tourism infrastructure. So like last year when we stayed in the Algarve and we wanted to, have a house on a hill with a pool, then you use Airbnb. It's just a different kind of experience.
All right, let's finally make it down the Atlantic coast to Florida, and I'm sharing your Disney book in the show notes. So let's hear about Disney the DOA.
Well, unfortunately, what is normally my way is about to be thrown completely up in the air because Disney World is reopening in a couple weeks. And they're going to a reservation system where you not only have to buy your ticket, not only have to have your hotel reservation, neither one of those will guarantee you entry to the park. You actually have to go in and reserve which day you're going to visit the park. And the reservation system, as you can imagine, with all this pent-up demand, has been absolutely slammed. Plus, they're operating at reduced capacity. Plus, they're operating with no parades. I'm very curious and a little skeptical, to be honest, as to how it's all going to play out. My advice to most people would be to hold off at least until October, November to see how things shake out, because the Disney technology is glitchy on a good day. So I'm trying to imagine how they're going to roll out brand new technology for all of these hundreds of people. On the flip side of that, Shanghai is back open. Hong Kong is back open. I believe Paris is opening in a couple weeks. And I'd be more comfortable, Tokyo is opening. I'd be more comfortable going to one of those parks at this point than I would be going to Florida. And if the two, when California reopens, I'd be more comfortable going to California than I would be going to Florida.
And what would make California seem more comfortable to you?
They've been taking
I've not been to California at all for Disney respects.
Well, it's not even from the Disney aspects. I'm thinking more logistically right now. I just feel like California is taking things a lot more seriously. For instance, they had announced that they were reopening July 17th, and they pulled it back because they made the determination that they weren't ready. So I feel like they're sort of being very cautious and very deliberative as to what they're doing. The same thing, obviously Shanghai is coming out of it now. Not to say they won't go back, but I would feel a lot more comfortable with the protocols that they have in place in Asia, or even once they reopen Paris, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with the protocols they have in place there.
Now, Universal and Lego, they hardly waited. They opened the second they legally could, it sounded like. So is that, I know Richard Kerr went down there. I don't know, what you've been hearing through the grapevine industry talk.
I've been hearing that it's all very touch and go. And it could be that one day everything is fine. Another day things are the technology fails. If something else, it's such a house of cards that everything is built on at this point. I can't with any confidence suggest that anyone go to a major theme park, especially not in Florida, for at least the next 3 months. Personally, I wouldn't. I don't know that I'll go in 2020. I even have a Disney World annual pass. I'm not convinced I'm going back in 2020.
How is that being handled for people that have annual passes? Is it the approach of all the parks open, use it or lose it? Or?
That's a good question. They have offered two opportunities for the time the park was closed. You could either have a pro rata refund of the time it was closed, or you could extend that time to your annual pass. However, with the way that they're doing these reservations, they're going to have an all-out revolt of annual pass holders if they don't have some other sort of accommodation.
Hmm.
Because the whole point of people having an annual pass is to being able to come and go as they pleased. And so the idea that you have an annual pass, but then you have to make a reservation that you may or may not get 3 weeks in advance, that you may not even be able to secure, they're going to have to make another accommodation for annual pass holders. They're just not going to have a choice.
Interesting that they don't seem to be leading in that respect, but it's the tough decisions. I'm thinking my apartment where we live in Seattle, and the only reason we have a coffee machine in the lobby is for prospective renters to feel impressed, like we have all these amenities. And of course, that's been offline for months. And I heard in a few weeks they may have some touchless ordering that the management will allow the machine to be turned back on. And that's just a stupid coffee machine, that a dedicated leasing team has had 3 months to figure out. So you think of all I was in Costco today, and I've been really impressed with all the conversions Costco has done to their stores. But on the scale of a Disney experience, it is mind-boggling just to begin to think through that. So maybe in an evergreen sense, but more relevant now, I'm not a parent. But I've heard that at least up to a certain age, you can take kids to Disney and have them happy with the experience of the hotel and the pool without actually entering the park.
That is actually, excuse me, that is actually a piece of advice I give that's counterintuitive to a lot of people, because Disney lets people kids in free up to the age of 3. The problem is the parents have to pay for their tickets still to get into the park. And a kid under 3 will honestly think that the merry-go-round in Disney Springs and getting to, at this point, if character meals even come back, getting to wave at Mickey Mouse or getting to see, the statue in the lobby of the hotel or see the big fancy pool, that kid's going to think they've been to Disney World. Buy him a t-shirt, get him some pins, and call it a day. Until the kids are about 4, I think personally 4 is like the magic Disney age to take them to the theme parks. Before that, I think you can kind of get away with having sort of a Disney light experience. Obviously the parents, sometimes it's more for the parents than it's for the kids. And I'm not going to tell parents not to go because you don't want to have those iconic moments for yourselves. But I don't really think you're doing it so much for your kids at that point. You're just doing it which there's nothing wrong with that. But don't feel like you have to do it for your kids when they're toddlers, because they honestly will not know the difference.
And I would think it'd be a conflict of in prior COVID times, the accommodation that would be recommended for the fun for 3 and under, or 5 and under, or 100 and under, are not necessarily the ones you might feel safest at this time, where the amenities might not just be available. So both on-site and off-site, what are some places for people that want to get away, but they're cautious? They may not enter the parks, but want that bit of Disney feel.
My go-to are the hotels in Disney Springs. There are 7 of them. 3 are Hiltons. There's 3 Hiltons, a Holiday Inn, a Best Western, a Wyndham, and an Independent. You get all the Disney amenities. They're half the price of either Disney hotels or the Swan Dolphin. I'm not a fan of the Swan Dolphin at all. And you still get, when things return to normal, you get your entry to the theme parks, and you get the Disney amenities. You're right across the street from Disney Springs. You still have Disney buses. So I think that they're a nice happy medium for a lot of people. But for bigger families, honestly, I would just I'd rent a timeshare.
Fantastic. And we now know where to go to find that timeshare. Exactly. It doesn't involve the agonizing tour and sales pitch and all that. But
no, not at all. Not at all.
Think of these industries, what's being affected. I mean, those timeshare pitches, I've been on 2 I was tempted by the points and just curious. I mean, the psychological pressure they put on you is really effective. I mean, it's incredible how they've engineered the sales process to get people to buy something that they never would have considered. But that's a huge amount of people packed in a small space. The interaction, the way they go from the salesperson to the good cop to the bad cop. Actually, even those guys are probably really struggling how to fix their model and still sell these things.
It's very true. And I've really been sort of pondering, and actually I'd be curious to get your input, stuff on how hotel loyalty is going to look. Because a lot of the reasons that people are loyal to hotels are things like club access or things like free breakfast. I mean, what happens it's like if you have club access and there's no club, do you have club access? It doesn't really. I struggle to see where having status is going to be that much of a driver for a lot of people. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that Marriott gave away half of the points, half the stays that you'd need for status, and that other companies are extending it up until 2022 because they're giving away the store because there's nothing on the shelves. I mean, that's kind of the way I see it.
Our weekend here, we're in Vancouver, Washington, an independent hotel, booked for price that I've never stayed at. A friend recommended because we looked at all the points options. I have every status in the book, some level of it, and its prices are high or not discounted, and it all says, notice we've temporarily suspended our this and that and this and that, so you're not getting anything that. And yeah, the hotel loyalty thing is, especially in the US, I feel like it's how to convince people to pay $30 to $40 more on the upfront rate for the same quality hotel. And that's like, I'd like to stay more at Hilton brand properties and in the US, or the Hilton Universe properties. And I always feel like, well, this one is costing me 30 or 40 more than a hotel I like just as much. So what, if it's just the cereal at breakfast, I don't need it. If it's them overseas, I care about hotel loyalty essentially for the lavish breakfast in Asia, where they often give you the restaurant access, not just the club lounge. And that's, that, I don't know. South China Morning Post had an article a few days ago that the lava buffets in Hong Kong is ensuring that those are still existing and reopening at the fine hotels. So it's
how are they doing it? Are they having just wait staff at every station? I'm trying to figure out how you even run. But Vegas, I think some of the hotels want to bring back buffets, and
I think Vegas, did Wynn just open? But it has to be brought by the servers.
Yeah.
Hong Kong seemed a little more flexible, and these are 5-star hotels. They were interviewing the TST. The Kowloon, Shangri-La, and different ones that it sounded like they are letting people go to the stands. But I was in Hong Kong in January when this started coming, and people had all the preparations, and even in confined spaces are very much aware and very conscious. So if anybody can make it work, them, and we're hoping that maybe by the end of the year or next year we'll be able to be back in Hong Kong if our passports are not a strength at this point.
That's very true. Are you guys even allowed back into China at this point?
Even foreigners that have residency are not allowed in. So I just have a tourist visa at this point. But in the past, even when I had an employment visa when I lived there, as I understand, they would not necessarily let me back in, even under those terms. It's even with the reduction in flights, even PRC nationals have had trouble getting space and all of that. And as far as I'm aware, the only thing I've read is I think it's Singapore nationals are setting up this what they call a fast track process that is nothing at all like fast track. It's like you get clearance 5 days before, then you can book your ticket, then you go to get a test, then you're tested. All these different steps. You really don't know if you're going to be able to get on that plane and go. And I think it's limited to 5-day stays and only for very specific business purposes. So I don't fault countries for taking those precautions, and not trying to circumvent them. So I'm not expecting to be in, certainly not in Shanghai the rest of this year. Certainly would like to for family and personal and eating reasons, but China does bring a smile to your face. Let's not all talk about the current here and now. You lived in Beijing for a time. Talk about that experience.
Well, I was there in the 90s, back before it was standard for Americans to be there. My family was in the State Department, and I interned at the State Department in the old embassy in Beijing. It was a very different time to be there. I kind of, looking the way I do, felt like a cross between a supermodel and a zoo animal. There was a lot of attention, a lot of touching, a lot of random people walking up and kind of getting so they could be in your picture. So it was a very interesting and strange experience. I learned very quickly that personal space wasn't so much a concept that applied to me, that I was sort of just like a novelty. And even going back into Shanghai, that only happened once in the week that I was there last summer, so or last fall. So I'm glad to see that obviously people are a lot more used to having Americans there. But even at the time, and I think even now a bit, the thing that people forget about going into the major Chinese cities is that they're also domestic tourism destinations. So you know what I mean? So a lot of times, even though Beijingers and Shanghainese are very used to seeing Westerners, you're getting people from basically out in the sticks, and they're not used to seeing Westerners, and they're coming to the same places that you are. They want to go see the Great Wall too. So it kind of, I had a lot of experiences with people that clearly, had not seen Westerners at all. It was a very strange time to be there. I was there when one of the first McDonald's opened on Tiananmen, seeing all the excitement and the lines out the door for McDonald's was a little bizarre. I had a family friend that tried to open a Dunkin' Donuts, but then it got co-opted by the government and kind of shut down indefinitely. So it was a very strange time to be there because they were doing sort of what they call it, capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Is that what Deng Xiaoping called it? So it was an interesting time to be there, both from a like a State Department perspective, because I'm seeing all of this sort of from the inside, but also then just as a customer, seeing all these new things coming up by the day and seeing them sort of co-opt Western style, but then distinctly rejected at the same time. It's sort of like a very tenuous relationship. Like they wanted to like it, they wanted to be part of it, but then again, there were a lot of things about the things like lines. Lines weren't really a concept that people in Beijing understood at the time. So, if you're going to McDonald's, it was like being in a mosh pit. It wasn't something that they were used to. So, being there 20 years ago was a very different experience than going back. Because when I went to Shanghai, it's the first time I'd been back since the 90s. And it was a very different experience to me, because to me, parts of Shanghai felt like they could have been New York or Singapore or London. You know what I mean? It was so modernized that it felt very, very, very different than it did in the 90s when it was first just sort of being introduced.
So you've seen that time shift, that change. And you've been back as recently as last year. So talk about those progressions and also Shanghai Disney, which I'm a Star Wars fan, so I went right for the Star Wars display. And I know it's not big in China. I was in China for the Phantom Menace, and nobody cared. But it was like this tiny little storage room in the back with the worst display. So that colored my experience, while others say that, oh my God, it's this great Disney.
Okay, well, first off, when everyone gets to Shanghai, they need to take a cooking class from Stefan's mother-in-law, because it was amazing. So that's the first thing I'd say. It's on Airbnb. You have to book it. It was so much fun. The other thing I would say, just about Shanghai in general, like I said, it felt exceptionally Western, and it was also just sort of from a tourism perspective, and I've been to 46 countries, but I've never seen as many malls stacked on top of each other. I mean, I thought that, New York City was over retailed, there's going to be a huge contraction in retail. But I mean, in Shanghai, my God, there was just retail upon retail upon retail. And, I knew that when in the same block, I saw a White Castle and a Taco Bell, which were brands that even, I don't know how many years they've been in China, not very many at all. I mean, I'd barely seen Taco Bell in Europe when I lived there, or in 2000.
Actually, when I was working in Shanghai in, was it 2003, was it? They opened a Taco Bell near People's Square in Shanghai, and it was like a TGI Fridays level of pricing. and service sit-down restaurant, and it was not there long. So, yeah, there was that one entry, and then years. Yeah, this is all new again. To try again. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have a soft spot for Taco Bell because I lived in Dublin when I was pregnant with Aiden. And that was sort of like my one pregnancy craving that I couldn't get. And so I would have like literal dreams about Taco Bell bean burritos. So when we came back to the States halfway through, I basically, bought like, I don't know, 40 of them and brought them on the plane with me and froze them when we got back to our residence. So I have a soft spot for Taco Bell. Back to Shanghai. Shanghai Disney has, for one thing, it has the single best ride in the Disney world, like in the world, period. With Pirates, their Pirates ride is unlike any other ride anywhere. I mean, you get swallowed up by a kraken and you end up underwater in this naval battle scene. I mean, because when you think like Pirates, a lot of people that know Disney think like, Johnny Depp, and they think Yo Ho 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 and other Pirates in Shanghai is nothing like that at all. Nothing. I mean, it's a genuine thrill ride, which is not something that people expect when they
the volume, by the way, the volume of the performances, the show, the pirate. Oh my God! I mean, I'm used to volume in China, but oh geez, I actually left because it was so loud in the different progressions of the thing that it was just breaking my ears.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The other thing I find funny, and this is both in Japan and China, is there's a character called Duffy Bear, and Duffy Bear was actually a merchandising invention. He was made for the Disney store here in the US, and he never took off. He was just like a kind of a dead on arrival because he didn't have any backstory, like Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse and Pluto. They all have these cartoons and movies or whatever to back them up. And Duffy was literally a Disney store invention. And he sort of like wandered around. Eventually they stuck him at Epcot as like a World Showcase mascot. But then when Tokyo Disney opened, when they opened Disney Sea, they put a sailor outfit on him and sent him to Japan. And the Japanese go nuts for mascots. So all of a sudden, Duffy is like this cottage industry. And in both Japan and in Shanghai, Duffy was more popular than Mickey Mouse. And like Duffy has this whole family now of like side characters. There's still not a single show that I don't think there's a single piece of anything but merchandise to back up Duffy. But like the character meet and greet for Duffy, the line was easily 3 times as long as it was for the line for Mickey. And there were kids like with Duffy gear screaming Duffy. And if you weren't familiar with the story, you'd be like, who the heck is Duffy? But now Duffy has a girlfriend, Shelly May. He has a bunny friend. There's a cat named Gelatoni. There's like this whole Duffy family, but it's only hot in Asia. I mean, you'll see them at Epcot every once in a while. Because now that people know about it in Asia, Asian tourists come here looking for Duffy. But that was one thing I found really funny is that Duffy is huge.
That reminds me when I was first studying in China, people kept asking about this movie Waterloo Bridge. That it's a black and white 1940s, and I'm pretty well versed in movies, and I really had never heard of this one, but it was a romance. It had somehow gotten aired in China very early. So people knew it so well, and actually, I've never watched it. It's bad of me. I think I once had the was it VCD at the time, but I've never actually seen it. Oh,
now you have homework.
Yeah, but yeah, it is great to have those experiences, and it's that made me just think about the food issue. And as I recall, Shanghai a year or so ago for Disney, because of different complaints and things, people complained that the government allowed food in, I think that people brought. And I'm just curious, what is the food situation now for all these reopenings? It's what can you bring in if you're worried about the on-site, and what are they doing about the on-site?
Well, they haven't really announced it. Typically, in a typical situation in the U.S., you were allowed to bring in food. You could pack a lunch. You weren't allowed to bring in alcohol, but other than that, you could pretty much, within reason, they wouldn't let you bring a cooler. But if you brought like a backpack and it had a lunch in it, you usually didn't have a problem.
Mm.
But they haven't really said. They haven't really said what they're going to do. The one thing that I have noticed, and this is one of the reasons I'm very skeptical about all of this, is that they're going to require masks except for when you're eating. The problem is with Disney, so much of the eating is done while you're walking around that I don't really see how you can enforce a mask policy if someone's holding a churro, or if they have a soda. So I'm curious to see how they're going to be able to enforce all these things. And frankly, I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical that they're going to be able to enforce them. But they haven't really announced what specific outlets are going to be open. They have announced that there won't be any character meals for the time being, which is going to be sort of a blow, I think, to a lot of people. They've taken away all the character interactions. They're not going to have any character meet and greets. They're not going to have any parades. They're not going to have any fireworks, basically any excuse where people would congregate. They're not going to have any of those sorts of things. They've done away with fast passes, so they're going to have to do some sort of virtual queuing system like they've done for the Star Wars ride. But I'm very, very skeptical as to how it's all going to operate.
Oh, we will learn, and I'm not willing to be the beta tester on that.
Me neither.
Absolutely no need for that one. So we'll leave it there. Another area I want to dig into is about the work you're doing. You've written your own blog. You've published your Disney World Hacks, which I've shared in the links. You've written for a number of major sites. So tell us what you're doing now and how you're being so resourceful to find these gigs.
In February, I joined Forbes full time. But before that, I have been writing freelance for about 4 years. I think, honestly, the way that I've found gigs is the same way that you or anyone else has. And it's just basically by writing what you believe in and by doing it, basically for free. I wrote for free for years. And just having a point of view. And I think it also helps that I'm sort of a contrarian. So my point of view is not everyone else's point of view. I think also Miles and Points for a long time had a very specific type of writer. And it's become more diverse in the last 5 years. And so I think that I've benefited from that as well. But part of the reason it's more diverse now is because we've been banging the door down. I mean, I started my own conference just to get people to talk about family travel because no one else was talking about it. But honestly, it's just a lot of it's just making friends. I mean, we in Miles and Points specifically and in travel in general, I think with your group and with so many of us all, we're a community. We're a community of friends. And even if we're, having drinks in Shanghai or I was talking to Spencer a few days ago, another mutual friend of ours. And the last time I'd seen him was in Rome in January. We happened to be there at the same time and we'd had lunch. And it's just very much a community. And I hesitate to use the word networking because I've always sort of hated the connotations that come with the word networking. To me, it's just more making friends and being helpful. And if you help someone else, eventually there may be a time when they think of you, when they're looking for someone for an opportunity. But a lot of it, I think, is just being generous and being friendly. But the most important thing I can say is have a distinct point of view, own your voice, and write. Don't write anything that you don't believe in because people can spot bull. I mean, they can read right through it, especially in Miles and Points. People, know what advertorial looks like, and they can spot it a mile away.
So there certainly isn't the diversity in the points hobby that some fields of human endeavor have accumulated. So it seems like women often have to be very thick-skinned and be one of the guys in this. And another woman in this area that blogs, we have an informal thing where when she clicks publish, she'll text me the first how many seconds it takes for the first commenter to correct her math, even though her math is correct.
Yes. My favorite, and I kept the comments on Saberosity open, even though there were times I was just like, why am I dealing with this? But my absolute favorite commenter, and at some point I should just print it out and frame it, was I'd written a post about Hanoi, and I'd written a post specifically about how my kids, this was their first trip to Asia, and we'd spent 2 weeks in Tokyo, and I'd made the mistake of going directly from Tokyo to Hanoi. I mean, I've lived in Southeast Asia, I've lived in Bangkok, I've visited, many, I lived in Beijing, I've visited many chaotic places. But taking them from Tokyo and Osaka, where even though it's crowded, it's still clean and it's, relatively organized, and, you can understand, kind of what's going on. And taking them into Hanoi, and we landed at like 11 o'clock at night, and we get our taxi, and then there's the guys with the mopeds and the chickens kind of, going like, and my kids, they were, how old were they? 8 and 11 at the time. They were like, what on earth are we doing here? This place is horrible. And they just completely did not understand Hanoi at all. And they were like, we ended up spending most of the trip at the lobby bar of the, not the Sofitel. There's a fancy hotel anyway. There's a fancy hotel in Hanoi. We ended up spending most of our time there at the lobby bar because the kids absolutely were not prepared. And it was my mistake. I needed to have eased them in. Because for instance, we did Hanoi, and then we did Hoi An, and then we did Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. I needed to have gone the other direction. If I'd gone from Tokyo to Hong Kong and then to Hoi An, they would have been ready for Hanoi. You know what I mean? But I just, and so I wrote a post about, this is my kids have had, we ended up seeing the Minions movie in Hanoi, which is not exactly what I planned on doing, but that's what we did.
I will give a vote for seeing any movie during the day Southeast Asia trip.
That is very true. But I got this comment. Anyway, I'd written this post basically saying, how, I was basically just asking, how are you guys dealing with culture shock? I've made this mistake. My kids are completely freaked out. And I had a commenter say to me, your kids are going to need Xanax if they can't handle a little traffic in Hanoi. But basically, I had set my kids up for a lifetime of therapy by not pushing them out to make them play Frogger in the middle of Hanoi. I was like, okay, buddy. Unfortunately, by the time I got to to see the comment, like 4 other people had commented after him, basically all saying, listen, dude, you clearly, don't have kids. You have no idea what you're talking. So, but I didn't even have to respond because my commenters had sort of self-policed this jerk off of my comment page. But yeah, and there's just, this, there's a certain kind of ownership in Miles and Points, I think, where people feel like they can just tell you anything. And I think that being a female, for some reason, they feel like not only can they tell you anything, but that you're probably wrong. They're just going to operate on the assumption that you're wrong. And just, it's sort of I actually even wrote a post saying why I love Miles and Points readers, specifically because of being so challenged, because then when I would freelance into like other sites, like I wrote for Traveling Mom for a long time, which is more like a traditional travel website. And it would be like crickets. I'd put something out and it'd get, 10,000 page views or whatever in a day, but there'd be not a single comment. And I'd be like, what is going on? I don't understand. And so having that interactivity, even though sometimes it really wanted me to take my computer and throw it up against the wall, I have to remember that it's a blessing.
And that's, and I'm glad you brought that out, because when I look at more general travel blogs, you say it's crickets, or it's just every person that has a blog putting in their link, check out my blog kind of thing. Yeah, and the Points readers are engaged, and I don't think the attacks on women are certainly, they're certainly not limited. I think they're pretty much anywhere online. It's out there, so I don't think the Points are necessarily worse from what I hear from people such as yourself. It's a problem endemic to a woman putting her voice online, and that's. I think so, but I will back that up a bit and say that
miles and points. I don't think that people are worse,
Mhm.
but because there are fewer women, I think that they are more targeted.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So there are fewer women for those basement dwellers upon whom to reap abuse.
Yeah, that does make it tough. And another one that I was curious to ask you is about Twitter, because if we're speaking about general travel blogs, often the focus is Instagram, big following, and then Twitter might just be a retweets and much fewer interaction, much fewer followers, to use that loathed term. But you do use Twitter, use it effectively. How do you use it, both for your travel planning as well as promoting your own work?
I live on Twitter, to be honest with you. And frankly, if you're doing miles and points and you're not on Twitter, I don't think that I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Like, not even just as I don't mean that specifically as a blogger, although as a blogger too, but even just as a person who's looking for places to get information, because there's no more concise, easy way to organize and quickly get a ream of information than Twitter. I make a bunch of lists. In fact, people, you're welcome to follow my list on my Twitter page if you want to. I have a miles and points list. I have a general travel list. And basically once or twice a day, I can just scroll through my list, and in 10 minutes, I can see what's going on. As far as effectively using Twitter for the blog, I feel like Twitter is a lot less, what's the word I'm looking for? For lack of a better word. I think that Twitter is it's a much more relatable. People can, just have an opinion, or you can ask a question and you'll just get sort of people's honest answers. Whereas I think on Instagram, especially lately, everything, in fact, I'm sure you've seen the people too. My favorite is the Pizza Hut in the Giza pyramids, where you have people strategically placing themselves in front of the pyramids, and then you realize that literally they're on top of a Pizza Hut or inside a Pizza Hut taking the picture. So it's, there's a lot of that, I think, on Twitter. I actually just recently reviewed a credit card for Forbes that is marketed to social influencers. It's meant to be the new credit card for social media influencers. And the card was just as vapid and shallow as you would expect. But it just made me think of, someone hoisting their girlfriend over an infinity pool somewhere, that that you'll never be. So, Instagram is pretty to look at, but I find Twitter is just a much more effective communication tool. And I just use it a lot of times to start a conversation, or if I'm curious about something. Like, I put up a poll a few days ago because I was just like, what's going on with this? I don't get it. Or it's just an easy way. And also, I think it's an easy way from a marketing perspective. I think it's an easy way to get yourself in front of other people, because you can ask someone a question. And if you're not doing it in a way where you're obviously just say, hey, I'm stalking you, Rick Steves or whatever. If you're asking an honest question, there's a lot of times where you might get a response, and you might actually be able to start up a conversation. And I feel personally like I have a bunch of BFFs on Twitter, people that I don't quote unquote know, but that I feel like I know. And like you and I probably met on Twitter. A lot of the people that I work with, or a lot of the people that I consider my friends, I met on Twitter.
Fantastic. And we'll close with, as like all great rock bands, the audience always wants to hear the classics, no matter how many times it comes. So,
I think I know where this is going.
So, of course, the story of Vendoming. I will share the link.
Oh my God. Yeah, I was picturing that. I didn't know the swig of beer. All right. For those of you that don't know, Vendoming is something I defined as doing something specifically because a blogger told you to, not because it makes sense in your life. I think I originally called it entitled overplayed arrogance. Dude, stop Vendoming your Prius, I think was the sentence I used it in. But the reason it came about, and sort of I think the reason is kind of the first time that I went viral, and it was because I was stating my opinion. That there had been like a spate of time, and I think you were around at the same time, where there was like a circuit. It was the Maldives, the Conrad Kosamui, the Andaz on Fifth Avenue, the Emirates apartment, the Etihad apartment, taking a shower on Emirates, and the Park Hyatt Vendôme in Paris. And unless you had done those things, preferably in the same, 72-hour period, apparently, you weren't a proper travel hacker. And I just sort of got to the point where I was like, this is crazy. There has to be another way. This is not what it's all about. And that really, it struck a nerve. It struck a nerve with people, both in a good way and a bad way, because some people felt like they were being attacked. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with doing those things. But the point is, not everyone has to do those things. And you're not a failure if you don't do those things. And it sort of opened up a conversation. And the other thing about it is that none of the items on that list, not a single one of them is good for families. None of those items are good for families. The Hyatt Vendôme, even in a suite, you're lucky if you can sleep for it. If you can, you might have to sneak one in. I don't know how you do 4 or 6 tickets if you want to fly business class. You have to have at least a dozen credit card signups. I mean, so it was a very exclusive. And I think that was part of the idea, was that it was meant to be like cachet. It was meant to be like, hey, I'm going to Seoul for the weekend. Look at me. But it wasn't really the way that most typical people traveled. And I think it made a lot of people feel like, why am I here? I'm being left out of the conversation. But there are so many other ways that you can use miles and points that don't require that you, have this very specific regimented check off a list type of experience.
I've done absolutely none of them. So and that's beautifully said. And I would have the points resources to undertake some of them, and none of them appealed to me in any way. The lemon poppy seed pancakes and that Park Hyatt New York, Andaz New York, I tried once because a friend was there, and I thought these are oversweet and not good. And
and you can probably buy a lemon poppy seed muffin for about $2 at the deli on the corner.
And it's like of any places in the world to obsess about not having to go outside to eat in New York and Paris. I mean, it's
exactly. Why would you do that? Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you for indulging us on that, the greatest hits replay, and thank you for joining us tonight, Dia.
It was fun. Take care, guys. Thank you.